of case studies. Good. We hope so. The blueprint was completed in 2021 to define, unpack, and explain the equity dimensions of OER in higher education and the role of OER in removing barriers to student success and closing gaps in student outcomes. So the idea of the blueprint was to reclaim and elevate the origins and impact of OER in equity, social justice, and student success. The rubric is a comprehensive self-assessment tool designed to guide students, faculty, administrators, and other academic practitioners in not only on better understanding, but on acting. That's the key. Not only understanding, as you know, the understanding, how do you demonstrate understanding? It's more important, what do we do about it? So it does allow folks to assess their landscape and then use that knowledge to say, okay, if we're here and we want to be here, what steps do we now need to take to move our work forward? So that was the intent of that work, and I think you're going to find that that's, in fact, what had happened. Next slide, please. So what is the OER rubric? On a very basic level, it's a guide and a self-assessment tool. The intention of the rubric is to integrate equity mindedness into OER and help to close equity gaps in student success by those steps: assessing the scale of adoption, identifying stakeholders, and I'm going to show you what the scale of adoption are and the stakeholders, and then take action. Next slide, please. Now, we built this on some values. The rubric is built on 5 values, as you can see here. Certainly very important, learner-centered, that this rubric, the notion of the rubric is to promote equity, inclusion, and accessibility, because we believe OER does those things. So we want to see, does it in fact happen at the institution? To redress longstanding inequities and taking responsibility for action, personal and professional, and individual and institutional. Success, achieving equity results in student success. So that's a very important part of this rubric, and we were very, very clear and intentional about building in that role of where are students in your institution and with their work and how are they engaged in this work of OER. Measurable. Equity is measurable. It should be measurable. Everything should be measurable, quite frankly. You know what they say, what gets measured gets done. So if you're not measuring, how do you know what you're doing? Right? You're doing anything if you can't measure it. So it needs to be measurable. And then the interdependence. The notion of equity and quality should go hand in hand. So when we talk about equity, we're not just talking about inclusion, engaging folks, but also about quality outcomes. Because again, if it's about student success, then it has to be quality in order for it to have the highest impact on our students. Now, next slide. Do you want to change the host? I know, we want you. We'd like to take a moment, yeah, I think we have time to do that, to reflect on which of these values resonate for you? Learner-centered, redress, success, measurable, interdependence. And Caroline is going to flip to a slide, that slide that you can see the URL right there. I guess if you go to that URL, you could actually put a note up here, which of these values resonate for you, and we can all see what you think. This takes like a couple minutes with this. I mean, people are going to be talking at you all day, so we thought we'd better do something to allow you all to talk with us and not just have us talk at you. Who put did someone write learner centered in? Oh, good. I like that. It's big in the middle. Nothing else resonated? Oh, okay.
So it's a bit.ly /DOERS 3 value. So DOERS 3 value.
Can you all see back there? Yeah, I know you get back in the bleachers. You may not be able to see as well back there. I know if you get in the mezzanine, I tested that. I didn't go back to the bleachers, so I'm not sure. Well, this is showing up as a word cloud, right? So the more people say the same thing, the bigger it gets, which that feels right to me too. That's why we started with Learner Centered and measurable, which I love to see all the people say that because I'm an assessment person. So it speaks to my heart.
Bob, I wonder if you could read out some of these.
Well, it's learner centered measurable, but then the next one's down, the interdependence. I don't know why that learner, because we didn't put a hyphen in it, that's why. And then you see, oh, that's interesting, the learner centers up there and didn't capture, I don't know. Measurable, success, integration, redress inequities, all of them. Listening. Yeah, I like that. Learner centered and measurable. Really come through loud and clear.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Yeah. See, that way you get to have to think a little bit here with us. Especially those laptops out there doing those emails. Stop doing those emails. You're here. Get those emails. They'll be there when you get, trust me, they aren't going their way. Rubric categories and dimensions. Remember I said I would tell you a little bit more about that. So here are the three broad categories that we built the rubric around. The stakeholders, that's what we're talking about. Students, practitioners, and leadership and accountability. And obviously students, because this is about them and it's for them. So we certainly want to assess the availability of OER, their access to technology and student awareness. Those are the actual dimensions within each one of those categories that we're assessing. Practitioners, of course, includes probably everyone in this room. There may be a student or two in here, I don't know, but certainly a lot of the practitioners are in this room. And those are the dimensions that we would be accessing. Equity-centered instruction, is there equity-centered instruction? The staff support, course markings, IT support, bookstores, those are important dimensions to assess for practitioners. And then the leadership, because as you know, we all know, if you don't have active, engaged leadership, it's pretty hard to do any of this work. It's hard to do anything in any institutional context if you don't have active, engaged leadership. So that's a very important aspect of this that we built into here, and looking at things like planning, budgeting, policy and staffing, PD and recognition for faculty, promotion and tenure. So those are the dimensions within each of these stakeholders that we assess for. Next slide, please. And then we did scale of adoption, because obviously everybody's not going to be at the same place. Some folks, it's not happening at all. And this is an important point. It was one of the things that we got was really come back to us from the 6 institutions who did this. This is not about evaluation, right? We're not grading here. It's not like, okay, oh, I'm beginning. Oh, I'm bad. I should stop now. No, no, no. It's about assessment. We're simply trying to say, where are you now? And wherever you are is where you are. It's okay. It doesn't matter whether you're not present, beginning, that's okay. Because the point of this is, if you assess where you are, then you say, well, where is our goal? Where are we aspirationally? Where do we want to be as an institution? So if you say emerging is your goal is, now you can see this is where we are. There's where we're trying to get to. And then you can start saying, okay, what's the gap between these things, and what are the specific tactics or strategies we need to undertake to help move us from beginning to emerging. That's how you use this. So it's an assessment, no good or bad. It is what it is, and you move forward. Now, the other thing I should have to tell you about is establish. We wrote establish to be, the top of the pyramid. So we recognize in writing it, it's very aspirational. Most institutions are not going to get, in fact, as we were writing, we said, heck, even our institutions aren't there. But we need to say what that would be. What would it look like if someone had an established practice? What would that look like? Because you got to have something to shoot for, right? So we understood that, and we were very clear about writing that into this, because this is all about helping you to move forward with developing action plans that you can move forward in a collaborative manner. Next slide, which I believe is Caroline, who's going to talk at you from the screen.
Good morning. Hello, everyone. So to introduce the pilot, in fall 2022, the DOERS 3 Equity Working Group, of which we are all members, launched a William and Flora Hewlett-funded project with 6 institutional partners, as Bob mentioned, to pilot the application of the rubric. The Equity Through OER rubric, again, served as a demonstration project to sort of test out the assessment, the rubric, and to sort of iterate on its design and its intended purpose and users. So we invited participants and expected them to adapt and customize the rubric to their institutional and organizational culture. The pilot project was really, our goal was to help make improvements to the rubric, as I've said, and to ask participants to reflect on how it is they engaged with it and perhaps even what modifications they would suggest to us. Single institution projects each received $10,000 for their participation, and the community college system received $14,000. There were a few primary goals to the project. We were fortunate to incentivize these institutions to engage in self-assessment guided by the rubric. So that was our primary goal, to invite institutions to engage in self-assessment with the rubric as a guide. Next, our goal was to encourage participants to reflect on that engagement. What would they change? What do they recommend? How could it become more of a useful tool? And then finally, we hoped the rubric would allow institutions to really grasp the conditions at their institutions in order to better understand and to act on equity OER dimensions. We hoped in their participation that participants could improve the quality of educational offerings and delivery, that they could begin to address disparities in student educational outcomes, and begin to develop institution-wide infrastructures that were student and equity centered. We understood too that there could be a multitude of ways to engage with the rubric. Some folks might use it to honor and celebrate accomplishments. Others might use it to identify action items and areas for improvement. Some might focus on the rubric in its entirety, while others might hone in on 1 or 2 specific portions of the rubric. So who were our participants? Again, we had 6 institutions, and we had a really strong application pool for the grant programming. And we were fortunate with these 6 institutions to get a glimpse of a variety of institutional settings and conditions. The 6 institutions varied in terms of their engagement, their capacity, their size, their student populations, but importantly, what we were very happy to see is the diversity of the student bodies were really representative of the post-traditional student populations increasingly served by higher education institutions. They varied in terms of race and ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, and so on. So Front Range Community College is the largest community college in Colorado, enrolling around 27,000 students. It has several common transfer partners in Colorado, including University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado State University, and Metro State University of Denver. It's one of the 13 member institutions in the Colorado Community College system. And their primary goal was to establish actionable items to begin to close gaps. Maricopa Community College is comprised of 10 separately accredited institutions, 9 of which are Hispanic serving institutions, and 1 of which resides on the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community lands. They typically enroll around 94,000 students, 48% of whom are first generation, 20% receive Pell Grants, and 25% received financial aid. Their primary goal in their participation was to develop roadmaps for each individual college and district. Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts is the smallest and most geographically remote of the Massachusetts State University system. MCLA's student body has the highest Pell eligibility among the system campuses. 46% of MCLA students are first generation, 27% are students of color. MCLA had several goals. They wanted to investigate course marking plans. They wanted to unify their OER data. They wanted to host focus groups and campus conversations around OER and equity. The University of Baltimore is an anchor institution for the city of Baltimore that joins a coalition of city-based universities. It serves around 3,700 graduate and undergraduate students. 68% are minoritized ethnic groups, 59% are first generation, and the majority of their students are Pell eligible. They really have a strong offering of career-focused education for aspiring and current professionals. They too wanted to identify gaps in their OER initiatives and really champion across the campus the benefits of OER. The University of Northern Colorado offers baccalaureate programs and master's and doctoral degrees, primarily in the field of education. They enroll around 9,000 students. It is an emerging Hispanic serving institution and is actively working toward that status. Their goals were to identify connections between OER and DEI efforts to raise awareness and enhance adoption across the campus. Finally, the University of Texas at San Antonio is also a founding Hispanic serving institution. In 2022, the campus reached Tier 1 research status, placing it in the top 4% of research universities in the nation. They have around 34,000 students, of which 45% are first generation, 59% identify as Hispanic or Latino, and 70% undergraduates receive financial aid, with over 50% receiving grants. And their goal was to increase awareness and relationships to support OER. So hopefully, as I've described, you can see the broad range of variety among our participants, which really led to rich insights for us throughout the grant. So what is the timeline? What did it look like? Well, we started with a call for proposals in September 2022. We announced the funded projects in November of that year. And then in December, we launched the project with a virtual kickoff meeting for all the grant participants, and all the members of the DOERS 3 Equity Working Group were present as well. And we led the meeting by sort of laying the foundation with an overview of the grant requirements, the deliverables we expected throughout the process. We looked more deeply at the rubric as a group, and then we had breakout time for each project to work with their assigned members. We assigned 2 members of the Equity Working Group to act as mentors to each of the 6 institutions. It was clear from the outset to us, as members of the Equity Working Group, that the mentoring would entail a great deal of two-way learning. In other words, we were learning alongside those grantee participants. They had as much to teach us as we could in mentoring them. In addition to that launch meeting, we offered check-in meetings throughout the year with mentors, and we really left the choice of the cadence of those meetings up to the grant leads. We did that because we recognized there was a lot of time committed into producing these deliverables and to doing the self-assessment, and we didn't want to make any more onerous effort on the grant participants. So we had those check-in meetings, and then in fall of 2023, we had a convening in St. Paul, Minnesota. Many of the grantees did attend the meeting, and it served to be a really great networking opportunity. There was a very strong sense of community for both the grantees and for us as members of the working group. And it was really timely too, because it was at a point leading up to the December deadline. And that at that time in December, we had a final project meeting where we celebrated the work and deliverables of all the grantees. And we also took the time to conduct exit interviews with each of institution, and that yielded critical information to guide our revisions and processes moving forward, which we'll get into a little bit later in this presentation. Throughout their participation, grantees were asked to produce 4 deliverables. Some of these were intended to be tools for them as they pursued this work, while others became public-facing content. We provided templates for each of these outputs that we hoped would allow customization to their own institutions with some uniformity so that we could see differences and distinctions between each of their experiences. The project descriptions and case studies are available on our project website, and we encourage you to take a look more deeply at them because they do have a lot of rich content that's very informative. Grantees also expressed appreciation for the opportunity to conduct the gap analysis and to develop the action plan, which were, again, more internal documents to guide them moving forward. And now we're going to look into some thematic feedback and recommendations, and I'll pass it back to Merinda for that portion.
Great. Thank you, Carolyn. So sounds still good for everybody in the back? Room volume's good? Great. Thank you. So what we'd like to do now is turn to a thematic overview of the DOERS 3 Equity Working Group's findings from the pilot. And in this, emphasize the group's resulting recommendations for future programmatic changes. These findings and recommendations summarize and synthesize grantees' experiences with the rubric in the context of their distinct institutions and their roles. And they also emphasize that grantees' self-assessment practices when they engaged with the rubric was doing the work to advance equity in ways that are effective and advance quality and effectiveness of institutional practice and also educational delivery with the goals of removing barriers to student success and closing gaps in student outcomes. Next slide. So our first theme is evidence and impact. Next slide. Recommendations that we arrived at for programmatic changes are to encourage all users wide consideration of existing and new institutional data. The projects surface that a very, very wide array of data can be relevant to understanding institutional equity and equity through the challenges and opportunities of OER. We also would like to encourage participants to share their institutional experiences of data collection. Doing so can contribute to increasing broader awareness of how OER impact and equity may be reported in very different ways across diverse institutions. Next, recommendations for programmatic changes that we arrived at related to engagement and shared responsibility. These are to encourage grantees to utilize the rubric to transition from maintenance-oriented practices to really a growth-focused approach, as well to encourage future grantees to utilize the rubric as a diagnostic tool to easily detect existing gaps and to inform strategic planning and implementation. And I want to note as we go through these that these may spark ideas for those of you in the room and online about using the rubric at your own institution. And next theme, institutional capacity. Recommendations for programmatic changes for us in the future are for the Equity Working Group to better support and emphasize cross-institutional communications. There was a lot of richness and nuance in each institution's experience using the rubric, and we want to make sure that in future there would be the opportunity to really encourage more communication throughout the term. Also, to advise grantee teams to attempt to align project goals to institutional strategic plans, to have a contingency plan in the event of team turnover. We all know that employees can change frequently in higher ed, and so it's important to have a backup plan with a project like this. How will your team continue its work if employees change? And then also to make clear to grantees that they don't need to tackle all aspects of the rubric at once. You can choose a piece of the rubric to look at, assess, and look at addressing in your institution. And then in terms of recommendations for student experience and agency, the working group suggested programmatic changes to encourage grantees to include its students early, often, fully, invite grantees to share materials and methods used to gather students' feedback, because people do this differently, and sharing these ideas and these strategies can be helpful. Providing grantees with models or examples of engaging students in OER awareness, education, and advocacy, and inviting grantees to share student engagement strategies with co-participants really early in the grant cycle so that everybody can leverage these. So I'm going to move on a little bit, just awareness of our time here. I'm going to give you a moment to read some of these on screen. These are further recommendations related to students. And then we will just pass the reflection for a moment, given the time, and come back to more reflection at the end of the presentation. So finally, the working group developed recommendations for supporting collaboration and community building among grantee teams. And these include things like mentor meetings being scheduled at the onset versus throughout the grant program, and making them more frequent, such as monthly, connecting grantees to each other early and throughout the program to support peer-to-peer learning in those ways that I've talked about, convening grantees in person early in the grant cycle so they really have a sense of being a cohort across such as 6 institutions, and then providing funding for grantees to attend the DOERS 3 annual convening, which is happening this Friday. Over to you, Bob.
All right, back to me again. Next slide, please. All right, so as we said, we did this in part to not only help for them, the participants, to help inform their practice at their institution, but also to help us to figure out how this rubric worked or didn't, and what things we could do to help future folks use this rubric. So, because again, the group of folks who developed this, we sat among ourselves and developed this and worked on this. I mean, and we're all at different institutions, both institutions, systems, et cetera. So, you know, we're all out in the field, if you will. But still, it's one thing creating something like this. It's quite another to actually apply it. So it was really important for us to say, how are we going to make this better so future folks will be able to use this work. And at the end, our website will come up so that you can capture that, so you can actually go online and look at the rubric in its entirety. So next slide, please. Oh, good. She put that in for the folks. Moving forward, so what is it that DOERS needs to do to evolve the rubric? Well, here's some of what we learned from those institutions. This is what they told us after we got to the end of this. That a simple thing that we could do is to provide a high-level one-page version of the rubric, something just simple and easy that they could use with folks at their institutions when they're trying to explain, what is this thing that you're doing? And to give them something that could quickly and easily explain what they were doing and what the purpose was. Again, it's something we hadn't even thought about. It's like, oh, yeah, that probably would be pretty useful. To take further steps to provide shared language and vocabulary through the use of a glossary. Because, again, when you're using something all across the country, you can't assume that what you understand something to be is what other people do. So, like, that's another really good suggestion. And acknowledging the challenges and opportunities serving with all the different types. So as you can see, we picked those 6 institutions, and we intentionally, very deliberately picked 6 very different kinds of institutions because we're doing a pilot. So we really want to kind of, as they say, stress test this thing to see how it worked in different environments. And they said, yeah, that's something we really got to pay attention to, because obviously how this stuff looks and feels in small versus large, or rural versus urban institutions, individual campus, multi-campuses is all very, very different. So take that into account. And next slide, please. And then there was a lot, as you can see here, around language, linguistic context. In fact, the lady from Canada, who was actually I was sitting next to this morning at the session, who talked about they had 179 languages spoken at her institution. I mean, a lot of institutions have a lot of different things, languages at their institution. So as you can see, there's several bullets up there about taking language consideration into account in the rubric itself, and to address that so that we can try to make sure that this process is accessible to everyone that we're doing, especially when we're looking at students, the stakeholder groups, students, administrators, et cetera. So that was very important, including learning frameworks and acknowledging, we can't talk about this obviously without talking about acknowledging the political climate in the US, because that creates a whole nother challenge around doing this work. Because again, we started this thinking about the issue of equity in use of OER, and some folks, as was expressed in the meeting, as some of you all know, you can't even use those words at your institution. So, but you can certainly talk about student success, because this still helps your students to be successful. I think there was another lady, they talked about, well, we use inclusion instead now. Inclusion and student success. Figure out what works that allows you to do the work, because the student populations are there. Whether the political folks want to ignore that and stick their head in the sand, they are there, and we have to help our students. So we have to deal with the real, not some idealized norm. So, personal name. Oh, okay. Next slide. I think that's okay. Yeah.
So we are out of time, and I want to allow for at least a couple questions if there are any. We do have a Padlet in the prior slide, and the slides are in the sketch. If you'd like to go back and share your reflections on the rubric on that Padlet, that would be wonderful. We'd welcome that. We do also have contact information on this final slide. Bob and I are obviously here, so are other members of the working group, including Lillian, who chairs, and we invite you to ask any of us about the project, as well as many of the grantees who are here. Yeah, and we'd really like to acknowledge all of the pilot participants. Yes, question.
Oh, can you not hear me? Oh, okay. Well, I don't know if it pertains to them online, but I signed up to go to the DOERS convene on Friday.
Yeah.
How's everybody getting there? Because or can we?
Who's planning on traveling to that can come up too as we end.
I was wondering if we could put it somewhere where people can receive.
Let's talk about that a bit later. Any other questions about the rubric or the pilot program? Yes. And there's a link to it in the slides, and it comes easily on the DOERS 3 site. Yeah, thank you for asking. Any other questions?
Hi there. I just wanted to ask, with the feedback you received, did you make another version of the?
We need to make some changes to the rubric based on the outcomes of the pilot and the findings. Yeah, thank you. Liliana, are you going to field more?
So based on the results from the pilot grant, we wrote a report that is hopefully going to be it's already on the DOERS website.
Yeah.
And it has all of our findings as well as the recommendations that came out of this work. And those recommendations include how we're going to be updating the rubric to incorporate our findings based on the feedback from grantees. The timeline, I don't think we have an established timeline, but we are all currently working on coordinating how we're going to go about and creating kind of a process for updating the rubric.
Nancy, if I'm from Drawers, please feel welcome to ask us questions.
Oh, is this the next group? Oh, okay.
Slides going? Thank you. It always goes
I just wanted to let everybody know that you can stay around as long as you want in this room. But we're gonna be moving on to the next session.